Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Nelson. I'm chair of the Planning Commission, and chairing this subcommittee meeting with us today is Commissioner Donor. And then we have multiple staff members, including City Attorney Patrick Munoz and Assistant City Attorney Jennifer Farrell, along with Brenda Wisniewski and John Chiampa. And I think, Allison Peterson is on, as well as Jeff Rossler, who's our code enforcement expert. And I want to thank all of you today for joining us. I believe today is our manager's call. And as we discussed in the previous stakeholder meeting, once we got done with phase one, which was implementation of some of the new guidelines, we'd move into the second phase, where we really start talking about what short-term rentals look like, where they are, what they are, if they're allowed, where they're allowed, and some of the nuances of the coastal zone. And that's why we're here today, and really appreciate everybody's time today and your input as we move through this. There's going to be, at the beginning, we're going to go through a number of things, talk a little bit about the update, then the process that we've been in as it relates to evaluating regulations. We're going to look at the statistics, talk about recommendations, and get some Q&A going between the management companies as we try to move through this. You're one of 4 groups. And again, thank you so much for your participation. With that, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. So one thing that I think is important that we wanted to share with everybody is that we started this process quite a while ago and got some really good direction from the City Council in July of 2020. And several of the things that they asked us to do is one, to maintain the character of our neighborhoods and do what we can to prevent corporate or absentee investment, firmly protect against the nuances to those situated around STRs, and balance the rights and responsibilities of all residents, homeowners, and honor the HOA regulations. And that was the guidance that the subcommittee got from or the Planning Commission, which then formed a subcommittee to try to digest and incorporate all of the things that the City Council asked into these 2 stages. Next slide. So on June 21st, we updated our regulations, and a few of the notes on that is we kept the minimum 2-night stay. And John, maybe you can jump in and help me out with the Coastal Commission requests and whether this is something that we're going to have to go back and change relative to the 1 night versus the 2 nights.
Yeah, so the Coastal Commission, in original discussions with staff about looking at different options, they had requested that if an ordinance is moved forward or program that looks at homestays differently than other short-term rentals, their preference would be to allow them to operate at a minimum of 1 night. Just given that the dynamics of a homestay, which we'll go into the definitions later in the presentation, but a homestay is where typically you're renting out rooms of your home while you are there. So the dynamics is a little bit different, and they felt that it should be a minimum of 1 night. So we wanted to put that in there just to kind of give a little bit more context to that.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. I didn't catch that, but now I see the note on homestays. In addition to looking at that, we looked at occupancy limits, not only at night, but also during the day, as well as parking, and then implemented a notice to abutting neighbors. This is an annual process that will familiarize the neighbors with where the STRs are. And in the instance they're not behaving, they'll have contact information included in those notices. Next slide. So I wanted to hand this over to our city attorney to discuss some recent cases relative to short-term rentals. And I believe, Mr. Munoz, you were going to jump in and talk a little bit about this.
Yes, thank you. So briefly, there's this new case that's shown in the slide. It's Cracky versus City of Santa Barbara. It's a reported opinion from our Court of Appeal that in essence takes the position, it's oversimplifying this, but in essence takes the position that a city cannot regulate short-term rentals without going through the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission took the position in that case that any residential use is permitted by right to operate a short-term rental. In other words, they're kind of saying that a short-term rental is just an extension of a residential use. The court didn't go so far as to adopt that position in its opinion, but it made it very clear that anything that a city does that relates to the short-term rental process and any sort of regulation has to go through coastal. And, you know, kind of cutting to the chase of what the case really stands for is a pretty strong argument that a city cannot prevent short-term rentals from occurring. This is something that our council's been pretty cognizant of for a number of years. The case law has been sort of changing in a manner that makes it more and more clear that the courts are going to expect that in a coastal city that short-term rental uses will be permitted. We've always maintained that short-term rentals are prohibited by our zoning code and that they are prohibited by our current local coastal program. That is just a position that's at odds with the position that the Coastal Commission has been taking. So just sort of, you know, I guess at the highest level, the takeaway is that the Coastal Commission and the courts seem to be of the view that cities are going to have to allow these things to occur.
Great, thank you, Patrick. And there may be some questions down the road here as we start to talk about framework and stuff, but appreciate the update and would move to the next slide, Jonathan, which is a bit about our framework. And you know, one of the things that we've looked at and thought a lot through is, you know, how do we develop the regulations in this phase, knowing that there's a lot of options and there's a lot of criteria. We have, you know, everything from council districts to coastal zones to consider as to how we locate or where we locate. We also have the city council direction. We have guidance from the Coastal Commission. We've got our data that we've gathered from our code enforcement. And then we also have the round one of the community input that we have. So we have a lot of data that's come at us, and a lot of information. As soon as we start to build the framework of the next step, we thought some of that data would be important to share. And so Jonathan, why don't you jump in and take the next slide. You're muted, John.
Thank you, Eric. And in the discussion of the data, we wanted to look at, you know, kind of all aspects in the city and to guide this phase 2 process. And so we've developed this map to kind of help understand and digest the, you know, all the information that we have to aid in providing the feedback. So with that, we have this map, and so on the map we've got it broken, all the residential zones broken out into 2 different types. We've kind of boiled it down to single family residential and the multifamily residential. We've also identified the mixed use zones within the city, as that's another area of possible consideration for short-term rentals. And with that, we've also identified the location of the coastal zone. And then all of the blue dots are the locations of the existing short-term rentals, so you can see where they're populated throughout the city. And as you can see, there's some specific clusters in the northern, central, and southern locations within the city. So we've drilled down to the data further to break out some different statistics. One is breaking it down by voter districts. So just to go in order, with District 1, we've got 30 short-term rentals that are currently in operation. Those are primarily focused in the northern portion within one community in the Corniche residential area. Then as you move into District 2, there's a small number of 4, and then another small grouping in District 3 with 5 permits. Then once we get into District 4, which is the Lantern District, we have another large grouping at 42. And then in District 5, which is the largest number and concentration of short-term rentals at 54, we've broken that down to the 2 kind of key focal areas, which is in the Beach Road area, which we have 34, and then in the Capo Beach area with 20. So there are some key areas where we have the short-term rentals located. And then so to look at this further and digest the data, we've broken down how many are in the single family and multifamily zones. So we have 93 that are in the multifamily residential zones and 42 that are in the single family residential zones. We've also looked at the number of permits in and out of the coastal zone. So we have 71 that are in the coastal zone and 64 that are out of the coastal zone. And then we've broken it down also by the number of short-term rental types. So the city's kind of landed on 3 different types of short-term rentals. And we'll go through the definitions of these in one of the slides that's forthcoming, but 123 are what we call of a non-primary short-term rental, which is of your typical short-term rental that you see. So that's the predominant number of operating short-term rentals in the city. And then primary residences, which is where this is your primary home, and you may rent it out when you're not there. There are 6 operating as those, and then homestays, where you typically live in your home and you may rent out 1 or 2 rooms. There are also 6 of those that are in operation with the city. So that's a quick summary of the data related to the short-term rentals. And with that, I'll move on to the next slides for Eric to go through the framework of the short-term rentals that we've been looking at, and look to your guidance.
Perfect. Thanks, Jonathan. So I know you touched on these, but I'll go back through them again because I think this is one of the first really important components of the next step, and that is, how we define STRs and the different types, because we can, permit certain types, not permit others. There's a whole host of things that can be done, and starting with obviously the homestay, which Jonathan touched on. We currently have 6 of those, and this would be a situation where you're renting out a room, or if you have a duplex, but your owner is on site full time and on site during the time the unit or room is occupied. So in general, I don't, other than in a duplex, I think you would be basically renting rooms, unless again, you're in a duplex where you could occupy the one main residence and the second unit could be a rental unit, which would be considered a homestay. Then we have the primary. This is a situation where you're the primary resident and you have the ability to rent it out throughout times of the year that you're choosing, but you are the primary. This is still your primary residence. I know there are several people that we've spoken to in the past who leave Dana Point during the summer and live somewhere else while they rent out their unit. Or vice versa, and that's considered the primary. And then the non-primary, which would be the full-time short-term rental where the homeowner is not occupying the unit, and when it's vacant, generally there's nobody living in it. And those are the different types of STRs that we believe would be regulated under our ordinances. And certainly would love to get some feedback, and we're going to do some Q&A here in a second. But if we move on to the next slide. So what the input that we're looking for today and feedback we'd like from this group and all the groups really is to start talking about what types of STR should be permitted in each zone. And then as a reference point, if we've included on this slide and a few other cities and what they've done. What you can see here is that Laguna Beach has allowed STRs in mixed use and commercial zones in their downtown. They do also have, I believe they grandfathered existing primary resident or non-primary residents, the ones that were in place. And they also allow homestays in their residential districts. That's just a framework, but starting off, we don't have a huge group here. So I'd like to welcome anybody to jump in, or all of you. Would love to get your input on these first three items. And you just unmute yourself and speak. If you could give us your name and where you're from, that would be helpful. First one off, the mute gets to go.
I can go.
Miriam?
Hi, I'm Miriam Rupke. I'm both a property manager and a property owner, so I kind of fall under both categories. But I manage a few properties on Beach Road, and then I own my own duplex that's in Capo Beach. Just in terms of the types of STRs that should be permitted, my personal opinion is that I don't think that there should be a difference between, classifying this by zone, where we say in residential zones, we can't have a primary or it's only homestay. I know that Capo Cares and those against short-term rentals are really pushing for this homestay, but to be honest, none of my properties that I manage, nor the one that I own, is a homestay. I don't know, and I might have missed it in the previous slide, so I apologize. If you could answer how many of the 130 something short-term rentals in Dana Point are homestays?
Yeah, so there's
six.
Of the 135, there's 6 homestays.
So that's a fraction thereof. To then try to put this by zone, where you say that in residential areas you can only have a homestay, you're essentially eliminating the majority of vacation rentals. To be honest, most of them are not homestays. Mine was at one point. It was a duplex. We were living on one side and renting the other. We've since moved 2 blocks away. So I'm actually right there all the time, but it's both sides are being rented as a vacation rental. I have clients on Beach Road, same thing, that they're, primary vacation rentals. They are not homestays. So in my opinion, I do not think that this should be, categorized by zone, or saying that you can only do one thing, because I think you're going to pretty much eliminate all of the vacation rentals. And, having a traditional homestay where you're renting a room is just, nobody does that. Like, unless you're targeting college kids, I don't know if anybody in this group right now would be comfortable to allow somebody to just rent a room in their house. And most grown adults who rent vacation rentals with their families are not renting a room in their house. That's something that a college kid would do, or somebody who's backpacking. So that's just my opinion.
Great, thanks. And one follow-up question. Thank you for your input. Do you think there should be a difference between, I know you said don't differentiate zones, but when we look at STRs, should there be a difference between an STR located in a coastal zone and one located outside, for instance? Is that any reason we should consider that?
No, why? I guess my question, my counter to that would be, why would there be a difference?
Well, I don't know there'd be a difference, but there's a different regulatory component where outside of the coastal zone, the Coastal Act does not apply. And a part of what we're doing here is to try to comply with the Coastal Act.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to be, biased in my answer, because my property doesn't fall within the coastal zone. So, and I think the majority in Dana Point do not fall within the coastal zone, outside of those that might be in the Lantern District or Beach Road. So again, if you look at how many short-term rentals are in Dana Point as compared with other cities, I mean, Newport Beach has 1,500 plus 1,500. We have 135. I mean, it's not that many. And, those who are against it are just all up in arms about it. But really, we have a really good system in place, especially the changes that were made. So I don't see, and the complaints have been minimal. So I don't see that a reason as to why we would need to keep it within the coastal zone. I think all of it is just making sure that we're following the proper rules and guidelines and being good players. And if you're not a good player and you're not following the rules, then, you know, 3 strikes you're out, or whatever it is that you guys decided with that.
Great, I appreciate that. And yeah, I'm being curious. That's, you know, the reason for my questions is just to understand everybody's perspective. So thank you again, Miriam. I do appreciate all your comments. Mr. Perry, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I do want to jump on what Miriam was saying, that I don't believe that, you know, we should eliminate or define what kind of type. And I think maybe for a slightly different reason. It's specifically speaking to Miriam's situation. When she moved, her needs changed. And, you know, I think there's changes in property use. I have owners who it was their primary residence. It's not going to be for the next 3 or 4 years. Then they're going to come back. The property use changes all the time. And so I wouldn't see that there would be an issue or have an issue if every time you had a different use, then it would get re-permitted as such. If you want to keep those different designations, but I just don't think it's fair to be able to just, you know, axe out certain people because they live in a certain zone or a neighborhood. I've got a couple more points. I would like, and
yes,
this is just a question. I don't know, of the 135, I'm guessing all of those are permitted. Is that correct? They actually have
that would be mine. Yeah, that okay. Would be correct.
Because I have probably at least 6 or 7 that we represent that are currently monthly that would qualify the moment that we can change into a short-term permit, and all of them are biting and chomping at the bit to be able to do that. So while we currently have 135, and again, to echo Miriam's point, we are not Newport Beach. I don't expect a giant explosion of this. But I personally have several property owners that will be changing their current designation as a monthly rental because that's our restriction right now to a weekly. Our minimum night stays are 7 or longer. That's just a personal preference for most of my owners. But I'm just saying I think there's going to be a percentage change. I don't know if you've done a poll about that or not, or if considered that. So maybe that's just something to talk about. Also, are the short-term rental permits transferable when you sell a property? I had a situation probably about 3 or 4 years that I believe it probably was one of the last properties that they were allowed the city allowed the transfer, and then it changed almost immediately after that particular sale with that. So I personally, and like Miriam, I'm biased, but I don't think that should be an issue. It certainly helps with the property values around here, and the needs for various types of guests, whatever. So those are a couple of things that I would like to kind of point out.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, go ahead, Miriam.
I'm sorry. Well, no,
we've got several other questions to go through, so you'll have more.
Sure.
This is going to go on for another 30 minutes at least.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to say real quick to, and I'm sorry, I don't even know who was speaking before, but just so you guys know, the city of Newport Beach does allow the permit to be transferable. Even during their, they had a somewhat of a mini moratorium during COVID, they still allowed property sales, those permits to transfer to the new owner.
Okay, great. Jonathan, why don't you jump to the next slide? So, and thank you again. I'm gonna encourage you to keep giving us feedback today, because it's really helpful as we continue to engage with the community. And by the way, I think at least I'll share my perspective is that everybody here is going to be biased around whether they like STRs or don't like STRs, and we take that into account and absolutely won't hold it against you guys for being pro STRs. We want to hear from the people that are positive about STRs. I for one am, as a resident, I have an STR next door, and it's really nice. So just that's one little caveat there. But the next thing we wanted to talk about, and Jeff, you touched on it, related to you've got some clients that may potentially want to get a permit. And so when we start looking at the process, one question that we've really got to figure out and ultimately answer is, should we establish some type of a cap? And should we establish or ensure that there is the right for grandfathering of the existing permits? And would love to get your input on that, as well as the other items. So really, if you could, chime in on the following. So whether we put a cap on it, whether we grandfather, I think we touched on this, but should it be by any certain district, whether it's voting district, zoning district, council district, coastal, non-coastal? I mean, we could break the way you could categorize this pretty detailed, going all the way down to the census blocks, but would love to get your feedback on those. And Miriam, if you want to take the lead since you're unmuted. Sure.
Yeah. I definitely think that those who have the permit should be grandfathered in. It's, especially if they've had a reputation and good standing with the city, no violations. I don't see any reason why they can't continue. I don't think that you should, again, limit it to how many per zone or district or anything like that. I would be open to a cap. I think they would have to be reasonable. We're not in Newport Beach, but we are also a very busy tourist destination as well. So I guess it would just depend on what that is. I really don't know.
Okay. Yeah. And Jeff, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think if you put a cap on certain areas, I don't think you should. This whole idea of vacation rentals designated to a particular zone because of a particular reason. I think you have to remember that a lot of these people that purchased a property, that they purchased it because that's what they could afford. Some people wanted a lifestyle of a condo versus a home. Some people, can maybe afford, down at Harbor Creek, but they can't afford over in Ritz Cove. And I think that by eliminating, people's wants and needs to be part of this great city, that we're in, that I think based on what I see here is these voting, zoning, census, I think it really, I think it's very unfortunate. So I think we're eliminating for reasons that are not equal to what you're thinking it is.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, we are not advocating for any of this. We're asking the question and just putting out the ideas of different ways we could categorize them or allow them, not allow them.
Yeah, sure. But
again,
as far as caps, that kind of thing, I think it'll, regarding, I think the financial affordability also needs to be considered for the people that are buying into the city.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, I think we talked about this, but I just want to make sure transfers. Jeff, you brought this up, but to your, in your opinion, these should be something that should be considered as something we should do. And then Miriam, did you have any input on transfers?
I think we should allow transfers. I agree. I mean, as a realtor myself, I think it does improve the marketability of a home. So absolutely, I don't see why we shouldn't allow that.
Okay, great.
Can I ask, this does relate. What about any current and new construction that might be happening right now? And by the time that all of this does come into place, those purchases that are being in escrow right now, what are we saying? I don't know. I'm just trying to present something, a particular case where someone gets caught in the crossfire of it wasn't permitted, now it is, but we were in escrow. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Do we back up the date of this? I just want to throw that out, as a consideration.
Yeah, and I think the city attorney could probably weigh in because it's more of a legal matter. If we haven't adopted a provision for transfers, I would assume that if we haven't adopted any new guidelines, then whatever's in effect at the time would apply. but let the city attorney weigh in on that.
Yeah, Eric, you're correct. It would be whatever the rules are at the time, and this is one of those issues where people are just going to have to pay attention. The law can change during the middle of an escrow, and there's really not a whole lot we can do about that. And there's, depending on where in the city a short-term rental is, the timing for the change could be impacted. So the timing for an area that we can impact outside of the coastal zone might be 30 days from when an ordinance gets adopted, but the timing in the coastal zone might not be until some time way off in the future when the Coastal Commission gets around to approving something. So, it's just one of those things that sellers ought to be paying really close attention to this and be making appropriate disclosures. And, a smart buyer might be able to take advantage of something that maybe a seller isn't aware of. It's just one of those things that we can't really control, though.
This is Carla Moore. I wanted to weigh in. I manage several properties with short-term rentals in the non-primary category. And definitely it would be a big asset to allow them to be transferable. And I think it would be an easy transition to make just by saying effective 2022 or whatever date. And the new owner has to qualify just the same way the original permit owner qualified, with insurance and inspection and all of the due diligence that was done in the beginning to get the permit. And it makes it easy as a property manager. If I'm managing a property for one person and it sells to another, it's going to be pretty much the same. So it's not difficult, but it would be a big asset to allow these permits to transfer as long as the property is in good standing, which I assume it would be.
Great, thank you, Carla, for your feedback. That's helpful. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the other things we need to consider is whether or not we have a maximum number of nights. And I think, and Jonathan, you can jump in if I'm wrong, but I think this really would apply to those primary, in the event we designate primary and homestays and non-primary as three distinct types. The non-primary in general probably wouldn't have a restriction, I would think. But again, that's really more for the stakeholders to kind of give us some guidance on. But when it comes to primary and homestay, the question really would be and I think you look at it, I guess from my perspective, I would think if I'm a primary owner and I want to leave for a few months, what should the maximum be before that unit is considered a non-primary? And should that be something that we consider when we look to classify these three types of STRs?
I'm still trying to understand what the purposes of classifying these three types of STRs. Is it that you're suggesting one would be, like a homestay, for example, there would be no cap on the number of homestays permitted versus primary and non-primary? And by the way, all of mine, I misspoke earlier, are non-primary. They're not primary. So all of the ones that I manage, including my own, are non-primary.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, that's really the question is, should we implement, again, if you look at homestay is a great example. Should we just allow them as a function of this process, and they have no maximum nights they could, rent out whatever room or in the instance of a duplex unit versus a primary where you have people that live at their home, but they may want to go on a vacation and let someone come from out of town and stay in their home when they're out of town. That is something we can certainly consider, which would be more of a primary, but then should we put a maximum on that? Because how do you process and track that? And then obviously the non-primary is kind of the status quo of what we've already got, and should that have a maximum? This is really, again, the question is, should we consider this?
No,
I don't.
Jeff?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think it all boils down to proper management. And if you're a homeowner and you're allowing a bunch of college kids to come for one night stays, what's to say that they're going to be better renters than somebody who's hosting a family that's in a non-primary short-term rental? I really don't see the difference. If anything, I think homestays, one-night homestays is going to be attracting the younger crowd, the backpackers, the college students who don't go to bed at 10 p.m., you know, who are, you know, are out there to have a good time and party. So I definitely do not think that there's a difference between any of these categories. I think at the end of the day, it's all about how you are managing your rental, whether you are physically present or not.
Yeah, I want to chime in and say, from the perspective of the owner, if you start putting maximum night stays on these, I had probably 4 of my owners that pulled out this last year during COVID and rented to a 12-month long-term tenant so they could save their property and save that.
Yeah,
so
and I don't think that, you know, that wouldn't even
you know what I'm saying? Well, but that would change the permit, wouldn't it? If they had a short-term permit as a non-primary, and to be able to save their property, they took a long-term tenant. So they changed the use of their property because of COVID. And so also I also want to say, along with that, I think, and if you wanted to kind of, I don't know if cater is the right word, but to create an argument for a lot of people that are against short-term rentals, aren't they asking for the longer term, the better? So if you have, I mean, they rather see somebody there for 6 or 8 months as compared to someone who might only be there for a week with the turnover. So I don't know that a maximum on any of these permits is really necessary. That's my opinion.
I agree. Okay. And I think also when we have only 6 primary and 6 homestay, that's 8.8% of the total. To make a lot of programs for 8.8% of the typical rentals that you have is kind of a waste of time. I would really focus on the bulk of which is the non-primary group, and make sure that that's where the investment is being placed. Anytime you place maximums on these rentals, you're basically limiting the ability to earn income, and it's just gonna cause the program to fold. So either you do it and you manage it, or you don't do it, is my opinion. Okay,
so let me try to ask it in a different way, because I want to make sure that the context of the questions is super clear. So in the instance of primary, so forget non-primary and homestays. In the instance of a primary, we have a homeowner who wants to rent out his home, you know, a few times a year for less than 30 days. That homeowner would have to have a short-term rental permit. There would be the ability through this stakeholder process, as we try to figure out what to do, to allow any homeowner to use their home as a short-term rental unit. And they can have, again, if you look at the slide, San Francisco, they're allowed to do it for 90 total nights out of the year, and as many times as they want, but no more than 90 times. Pismo has 182 night max, and then Palm Springs is 36. So if you have a home in Palm Springs, you could actually rent out that home to 36 different people for less than 30 days. You know, you couldn't obviously fit that many people in there over the year, but so hopefully that makes sense. I guess the question is, should we have a broader allowance for short-term rentals, including homeowners?
I fully understand what you're trying to say. I think what in trying to manage the maximum amount of night stays and to put these people into a box, I have homeowners that want to do a short-term rental, possibly during the summer, and then they want to leave for a year. They want to travel, they're retired. I think you're trying to put something, too many restrictions, and saying this home is only going to be used for this constant use at any given time. And properties aren't used like that. You know, properties can be short-term sometimes, and then they rent it for a year. So
Jeff, this is Patrick. Let me just weigh in on that for a second.
I
think there's a little bit of a misconception on your part. So if a home has a short-term rental permit, you don't have to rent it for short-term rental at all. There's no requirement that you use it. There's no requirement that you can't rent it for a longer term, or that you couldn't move back into it yourself. You just have the option to rent it on a short-term basis.
Yeah, but what it's saying, for example, with San Francisco, you have a 90-night, maximum. if I had a short-term rental permit on my property, and maybe during the summer, I only want to rent it for July and August, and I want to do weekly. And then I'm going to be traveling for a year. And then I just want to rent it to one person for that year. You have the extreme cases. And so they would get a short-term permit, but are you saying that if they have a short-term permit that they cannot rent it for longer than 90 nights?
No.
I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing
No,
that.
What we're
that's
saying
not
is
what we're saying.
you can only rent it on a short-term basis. So a short-term rental means a rental of less than 30 days. Okay.
So why would you have a 90-night maximum? I'm unclear why those maximum. I mean,
No,
I
I think
understand
he
San
means.
Francisco.
So let me
So what he
explain.
means is cumulative. So you can't
Right.
rent it for more than 90 days cumulative as a short term. 3
Oh,
nights here, 4
cumulative.
nights there. Yeah,
That's
what
the
they
key
mean.
word I was missing. I didn't understand the cumulative.
Yeah, exactly.
Not
So if
contiguous.
Yeah. So
Got it.
if you own a home and you're a traveler, retired couple that travels a lot, you can rent your primary residence as many nights as you want during the course of the year, stay in it as much as you want during the course of the year, as long as you don't exceed whatever the maximum night is. So if it's 90 days, so that's 90 nights that you could, 3 months worth of the year you could rent it. The rest of the year you have to live in it or not rent it, or rent it to a long-term renter. Kind of a funny analogy. I went to school locally here. I went to UC Irvine, and I lived down on the peninsula. And during the summer, people would rent these places out for whatever they would get a week, which is about the equivalent of what my roommates and I would get to the place all winter long. So we'd be a 9-month renter, and then for 3 months they would have weekly rental after weekly rental after weekly rental. So you could do that under our program.
Yeah,
So
I think
I
it's
think
still too restrictive. That's my
Yeah,
personal opinion.
I think that people, people's life changes. So I think, trying to put everyone in this box by saying this is all that you can do. I really I don't see the difference. I don't see the need to have all of these different categories. The short-term rental is a short-term rental is a short-term rental. Why overcomplicate it?
Let me ask you this question. Let me back up. The thinking behind having different categories is that there's a belief, right, wrong, or otherwise, that if the owner of the property is on site while the short-term rental is there, so it's a homestay, that the chances of there being a problem go down because the homeowner is going to be sharing in the nuisance problems that the neighbors might have to, suffer. That's the argument. And if it's a if it's a primary residence, it's your home. And so you're going to be much more finicky about who you rent it to, in theory, and that you're going to, that it's less likely that you're going to rent to someone that's going to cause nuisance problems to the neighbors. I mean, right, wrong, or otherwise, that's kind of what the thinking is. So hypothetically, if there were no cap on homestays, because the belief is that they don't really cause an impact. Is that something you would support? Does that make sense to you? Or do you think that they all should be treated the same? And so, and I will tell you, I think, this is me trying to read tea leaves, it's more likely than not that when this is all said and done, that there will be a cap on the number of short-term rental permits that the city issues. So if there's going to be a cap, would you think it is good that the homestays be included in the cap, or would it be better that the homestays not be included in the cap? Would you think it's good that the primary ones be included in the cap, or would it be better if they don't be included in the cap? And those might, those are the reasons why there's these different categories, because there might be different rules that apply to them. So, just some things for you to think about.
I think
so. I can understand your, the thought process behind this. I can understand the thought process behind it. However, speaking from experience, because I've done both, I've been both a homestay situation, and now I am a non-primary situation. And I'm a non-primary situation for both the property that I own and the properties that I manage. I am very, very selective on who stays in my home and who stays in my clients' homes. It doesn't make a difference. And I have never had one complaint, not one complaint from a neighbor, or, you know, any type of violation from the city for that matter. So, you know, maybe I'm a different case because I am a smaller management company. I am more hands-on. I suppose if they were going to make a cap and that was inevitable, then perhaps, yes, you keep homestays out of it. But I don't think that homestays are necessarily any better. I think it all boils down to, you know, the level of management, whether you're an owner or a property manager.
I would agree with Miriam in that I think not that we need to do more research. I mean, there's been a lot of research on this already done. But I think, you know, if you look at New York, Chicago, some of those other cities where, well, let's just take New York, that Airbnb developed as a homestay type of program where you would sleep on somebody's couch. And they're going through a whole thing right now where they want to eliminate or ban them. And I think some of these, and granted, we're not New York, I understand that. But I think that there is a false misconception that just because someone happens to be on the property that you're going to have less problems. In fact, I might even make the argument that you might have more because of the type of person, again, to echo what Miriam was saying, you're not talking about families and parents with children. You're talking about single adult people that it's basically a youth hostel. So that would be mine. And to put a cap on them, I personally would just lump them all into the same category. I really don't see a need, especially since we only have 6 in the entire city, to make special rules and accommodations for them.
All right, thanks. I know Carla, I think you were talking, but you were barely hear you.
I just said that I could see putting a cap on the number of permits, and it seems like that it really shouldn't be differentiated between those categories. I just think that we're spending an awful lot of time talking about homestays when people think they are going on a lot more than they are. There's 6 of them. Okay, we need to keep 6. Maybe we'll grow to 7. So it's just not a big deal, right? It's a very small percentage. And yeah, I mean, if we want to say, you know, the city has the potential to have 2,000 permits and we don't want that many, we're going to cap it at 250 or something, then I don't see why every category shouldn't get a certain percentage of that cap.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, can you move to the next slide? And so we've got a little bit of time left. We've got like 3 more to go through. So I'm gonna have you remember this one and circle back when you give us some feedback on the next slide. But you know, we talk about emergency contacts, who should that be? I think we know the answer to that, but if you could give us that when we talk about the next slide, go ahead and move to the next slide, Jonathan. So again, going back to categorizing, when you look at STRs, and the more I've listened to all of you, I think I know what the answer is, but should we limit it by percentage by zone? So multifamily zones, which tend to be more transitory versus single family zones versus mixed use zones. What are your thoughts on that? You know, real quickly, because our last question is probably going to take us a few minutes to go through. Carla, do you have any thought on that?
You know, I don't see limiting it. I mean, I think the HOAs are going to do that for you. I mean, there's so few areas in Dana Point that are outside of an HOA that have a minimum restriction anyway. So I think that kind of takes care of it.
I agree. I don't think that we should be limiting it either.
I concur.
So in the instance you have an apartment building, for instance, is there any reason to limit the amount that could be in an apartment building or in a townhome or condo project?
It's extremely highly unlikely that the CC&Rs on that apartment building will even allow them in the first place. I think it's what.
Well, so that's setting that aside, because there's you know, arguments being made right now that the HOAs are under control of the Coastal Commission. And so if the Coastal Commission had their way, they would just say everybody could have one. In that instance, then it would be the city's rules that would ultimately prevail. And so I want to, for the moment, talk about it from the perspective that assuming the HOA issue is not an issue and it's our rules, you know, how should we look at multifamily properties?
Well, are we talking about a sublease, or are we for an apartment, or are we talking about a condo where the person owns the condo?
You one in, you know, both. An apartment where you have an owner.
I think there's
rules
on apartments leasing that you can't do that in the first place. I mean, I'm guessing.
So I think if you're well, maybe are you talking about owning a condo like a unit, or is the owner of like a triplex or something like that? But because again, I think I don't think that there should be limitations. I mean, Eric, I think what all of this boils down to is that those against short-term rentals don't like them because they're a nuisance. If they weren't a nuisance, then this wouldn't be a problem. I have long-term neighbors next to me. Every week I'm calling the cops on them because they're a nuisance. So, you know, if it's not an issue, then why limit it? Why put a cap? Because, you know, you could have a triplex owner renting to quiet families, or you could tell that triplex owner, no, you can't short-term rent because we've already hit our cap in this area, and they rent to a bunch of, you know, party or long-term rentals. And so I think we're just spinning our wheels trying to come up with all of these different rules and regulations where it could just be very simple. If you're not following the rules, if you're a bad player, you have your permit revoked.
Perhaps I can start.
Would it be fair to say though, or ask that if you live in an apartment or a condo building where you share a common hallway with 10 other owners, and every single day 4 new groups of people move in and out, is that something that would be considered a nuisance?
Well, I think if I think if it's part of the CC&Rs, the CC&Rs or the HOA for that condo should cover it. But I don't think as an owner of a triplex or a fourplex, if they want to vacation rent their property, they can. And then if they decide that they want to vacation rent 2 out of their 4 units, they're going to let those other prospective long-term tenants know that, hey, these other 2 units are a vacation rental. Do you want to still rent this home? I think if it's part of a condo association,
that condo owner, then the 3 years down the road, that particular condo owner that's complaining now wants to rent their place out as a vacation rental. So I think restricting people's use just because, I don't know, whatever. I think that I just don't see that as a fair.
I can understand where this is coming from, though, and I think it's coming from the argument against short-term rentals that say it's taking too many units out of the year-round leasing and making it difficult for tenants, year-round tenants, to find property. I think that's probably where some of this is coming from. So I kind of understand it, but again, I do think based on the comments that other folks said that the CC&Rs can handle something like this and address it. And mostly there's duplexes or triplexes, and it usually makes sense for the owner to figure out what's the best use of their own property. Maybe one short-term rental, maybe one long-term lease, maybe one they live in the other one. I don't know, but I don't think we should spend a lot of time making limitations on that.
I'll tell you what, in this last year, I'm happy that I've been doing short-term rentals because I'm protected. I haven't had anyone squatting and not paying rent in my home for over a year.
Well,
so
that's scary.
And it's not cheap to own property out here. So you have to take this into consideration. There's so many different factors to take into consideration when you're long-term renting your home. 30 days or under, they're like a hotel tenant. You can get rid of them. 31 days and over, they're protected by tenancy laws.
Right.
So.
Great, Brenda. I think you had a comment.
Carla really nailed this related to the orientation of this provision. It comes from the housing advocates, basically. We saw this first when Laguna Beach went forward to the Coastal Commission, where they had a lot of opposition from people indicating that in an apartment building, when you have one property owner, there's the risk of the entire building to become short-term rentals. So that was the point of view that was being presented. And this provision actually is something that I think it would be wise for us to have in our ordinance, because we don't want to have criticism from individuals that be looking at that aspect of it.
Okay, that's good, good info. Thank you. So I want to go to the last question before we wrap things up. Jonathan, could you go to the next, or you're on it, aren't you? Or did we already go through this? I swear I saw one other one. Nope, this was the last one. Yeah, nope, we did. So that was a robust discussion. And I think we understand all of your perspective. And I'm gonna, again, thank you for sharing. I don't have any other questions to go over, but I know we do have a couple of things to talk through. So Jonathan, you want to jump in and talk about the next steps?
Yeah, I'll briefly just discuss that. So we are doing every planning commission meeting, there's briefings on the status and ongoing activities related to the short-term rental subcommittee. So there is notifications of those, as well as our next steps for public meetings. So those dates will be determined in the future, and everybody on our interested parties list will be emailed and notified of those. We will also be developing a public outreach program to kind of work through this phase 2, and the city is also going to be sending out a informational flyer to all of the properties within the city, and so to ensure that we have a robust public outreach process. So there is the possibility of additional stakeholder meetings as deemed necessary, if new topics come up and we want to continue to vet that and get your feedback. There is the possibility of that in the future. And I think, we want to finish this off just to see if there's any other comments or questions from any of you or additional feedback that you'd like to provide.
I just appreciate that you're doing this. I think this has been one of the more effective meetings we've had, and that we can, go through the agenda fairly quickly and clearly and make a few comments. And yeah, I just appreciate being included. Thank you.
Yeah,
I apologize. My internet got jammed up here at home, but I assume we moved on to the last slide, Jonathan, on the Q&A. Okay.
Yeah, I would like to echo Carla. Thank you. What is the city's rough timeline for this, where a homeowner can actually apply for a permit? What's the city thinking right now?
I don't know that we don't have a schedule.
We don't have a schedule. We are going to be working through it. I mean, I think that as we kind of get our arms around some of this information and data, and we can kind of schedule out what are our planned dates, we can circulate something like that and put that on our short-term rental website page. But at this time, we really don't have that. But we have been given directive by the city council to move this forward and try to be as timely as we can in getting this moved forward. So we are working on that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. I want to echo Carla. It was very effective. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, well, with that, unless there's anything else I want to... Oh yeah, please go ahead.
I was on mute. This is in regards to the changes that was made with the ordinance. The requirement for us to post our STR number on every single photo. Since our permit number changes every year, is there a requirement for us to update every single photo for all of our listings? Because you guys are still able to tell which permit that is. You're able to associate it to the property. That's a lot of work, especially for a property manager, because one house might have 50 photos, and then think about doing that on the RBO, your website, Airbnb. Like it's very time consuming.
That's good input, Miriam. I think we'll talk about internal ways to make that easier on you guys. We totally understand that. Perhaps the permit can stay the same. I don't know. You have to come up with some solution internally.
Yeah. I mean, if you could at least let us keep the same permit number on the photo, that would be great. So we're not having to update it every 12 months.
Yeah, totally understand.
And hire a photographer for each time. I have all mine professionally shot, so that becomes an extreme expense for me.
Good input, thank you.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you again for your time today. We look forward to moving things forward and appreciate the input and encourage you to stay fully engaged. And if you hear about a meeting, please come and share your opinions and your voice. It's really important.
Will do. Thank you.
Have a great night.